The recent bad weather had me snowed in last weekend. By the time the roads were clear, I had become full-blown stir-crazy. Desperately needing to get out and rejoin civilization, I decided that a trip to the nearby planetarium might do the trick. So I jumped into my car and headed off for what would become the adventure of a lifetime. This story is too unbelievable to be true, but it did happen. Partially. After an hour of driving, I arrived at the Planetarium of Smallville, boasting one of the largest telescopes in the state. I was impressed as I entered the huge ball-shaped building. There were 20 or so people in the main observatory staring into telescopes at the star-filled evening sky. As I looked around the room, I noticed that people were gazing at all sorts of celestial bodies from the constellation Cassiopeia to the Andromeda Galaxy. I quickly found an unoccupied telescope and sat down to do some star watching of my own. The time flew by quickly, and it was soon time for me to head back home. As I cruised down the highway, reflecting on the magnificence of our universe, my car suddenly stopped and a brilliant beam of light shone down on the highway just in front of me. Normally this would have been cause to panic, but this scenario had a strangely familiar feeling to it. I got out of my car, took a closer look into the light, and there he was. Orville Redenbacher. Not the real one, but an alien from another planet who kind of resembles the popcorn guy. "Howdy, Drew Pillow," the spaceman said. "Howdy, Orville, what can I do for you?" I replied. "Would you mind answering a few questions for me today?" "Sure, fire away." "No, wait, don't fire. What I mean to say is I don't mind answering a few questions." Then he began inquiring about all manner of seemingly unimportant topics. After about 15 minutes, he thanked me and said goodbye. He then abruptly turned and headed back toward the light. "Hey, wait a minute," I quickly said to him. He turned around and said, "Yes?" I said, "Before you go, can I ask you a question?" "Sure, you may," he responded. I thought very carefully about the question I was going to ask, because who knows when another opportunity like this one will come along. Finally, I decided to ask, why is there so much conflict in the world? Like, why can't people seem to ever see eye to eye? He smiled at me kinda like he was proud that I hadn't asked him for tomorrow's lottery numbers. To be honest, I didn't even think of that at the time. He looked at me and said, "Come take a ride with me and I'll show you the answer to your question." I'll admit, I was a little nervous about taking a ride on his ship. He must have picked up on my energy or something, because he said, "You can trust me." So I smiled and followed him and boarded his ship. It seemed like as soon as the door shut, it reopened again, and we were now hovering above the same planetarium that I had just visited. I could now see through the ceiling of the building, right into the observation deck where people were still peering into their telescopes. Look at the people down there. Did you know that if you asked each person to describe what they see, they might each give you a different description of what they saw? Even though they are all looking at the same thing, people can have different interpretations. I looked curious, trying to follow his point. Which interpretation would be the accurate one? He asked. "The ones whose telescopes weren't broken," I answered, jokingly. Now imagine if these people were in places spread far and wide. Each one would believe that their interpretation of the heavens was correct, and therefore all others must be incorrect. This can create a huge potential for disagreement. I nodded my head, finally understanding. Just then the door of a ship closed and then reopened again. We were once again beside my stalled vehicle. I stepped out and he bade me farewell. I stood lost in thought, watching his ship disappear from sight. I resumed the drive to my home. I had more questions than I started with. I banged my fist on the dashboard of my car. The radio suddenly came on and that familiar voice spoke above the static hiss. It said, "Your people must learn that one truth does not cancel out another truth. Just because a person is right, the other person is not automatically wrong. It's not always a matter of what you are seeing, but also of how you are seeing it." The voice faded away and I smiled. "One more thing, Drew," the voice suddenly returned. "What's that?" I asked. "Don't call me Orville." Embarrassed, I continued my drive.